September 21st. I'm reading at least 20 minutes a day for every day in September and posting a short video about it. This is to raise visibility for the Trevor Project and to show support for someone in my life. So I've been reading John Gardner's Grendel. I'm almost finished with it. It's not a particularly long book, and I can kind of tell that the format where I'm sort of reading this and reviewing it doesn't really lend itself to this book as well, mainly because there's a lot more going on, and I feel like a real review or study of it would require a second reading at least. I think I benefited from the Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in that I already knew the story, whereas here, although I know the story of Beowulf and Grendel, I've never read this particular book before, and I think my preconceived notions sort of colored my initial perception. I thought this was a lot more of a parody, sort of a humorous parody, but it really doesn't have a whole lot of that at all. There's things in there that might be humorous, sort of like a black humor, but that's more because of the modern slant to the narrative. Grendel does not speak as a creature from its time. He speaks in a way that we would understand, and I think that's part of the appeal. Well, what I read most recently was sort of Hrothgar has this, there's another young king who's stirring up a lot of trouble, and Hrothgar anticipates that this king is going to attack him at some point, so he sort of does a preemptive strike. He gathers together a bunch of his men, and they go off to this young king's place, and they kind of surprise him and say, hey, we're going to kill you. And so first this young king sort of says, well, what about if I give you a bunch of money? And he's like, well, you can give me money, but then you'll later on you'll come along and you'll kind of make us sort of placate us, and then you'll gather to your forces in secret and attack us. So he's like, well, what if I give you enough money that I can't afford to raise an army? I can't afford to get thanes, I guess. And he says, no, because words and promises can do a lot. Hrothgar says, no, words and promises can do a lot, in the place of money. And so then he says, well, I've got one. This young king says, well, I have one more thing. He says, what about this? And he basically brings out his sister, who is very beautiful, and everyone is sort of amazed by her beauty and her grace. And Hrothgar is swayed, and so he makes peace with this young king, and this woman becomes his bride. And at this point, Hrothgar's pretty old. I mean, I think he's described as being white hair at this point. So Grendel, of course, is always sort of privy to these things. He watches in the shadows. He sneaks along. He sees this whole encounter with Hrothgar and this young king. He sees, Hrothgar and this new bride, whose name escapes me because it is a Nordic style name, and it just is. I have difficulty with names, which I'm going to get to that in a second. So he's sort of, Grendel has is able to see all these things secretly from the shadows through the cracks in the wall, kind of like Frankenstein's monster does when he watches the Lacey family. So Grendel sort of has this insight into what's going on. He sees this young queen here, and she pretends to sort of be happy, but it's obvious that she isn't. And I think he gets very frustrated with how beautiful she is, in a similar way that he gets frustrated with the bard. Though the book doesn't call them bards, and I can't remember what the word is used in the book. Sorry, but in the same way Grendel got frustrated with the poetry of this bard, he gets frustrated with the beauty of this young queen, and breaks in and almost kills her, and then at the last minute sort of decides not to and leaves. And so you can see that there's always this sort of like the warriors and Hrothgar himself never really know what to think about Grendel, because he'll break in and kill a bunch of people, and then sometimes he won't, or he'll break in and just stir up trouble, just sort of like to antagonize them sometimes, in addition to killing and eating them sometimes, but really just out of spite or nastiness or sort of irritation at them, not really out of like true anger or hatred of them, or not completely. I guess Grendel gets more satisfaction out of the plaguing them than it does out of obliterating them. So I'm enjoying the book. I just feel that a better, more thoughtful review of it after a second reading would probably be a lot more beneficial to anybody. But I think that this is good, so I sort of can record my initial thoughts, and then when I go back I can say, maybe I didn't think about this or whatever. So these short videos will have to stand in as my review until I'm able to do that. So I also want to say that someone commented on a previous video of mine where I talked about Avram Davidson's story, The Golem, and that's the correct pronunciation of his name, Avram, not Avram, Avram, and posted an interview in a sort of podcast format that this person has, where it's sort of it's a podcast that specifically deals with Avram Davidson's works, and it had a great interview with Robert Silverberg, a real fantastic science fiction writer that I've always really enjoyed and have a real special reader relationship with, in a sense. Actually, Robert Silverberg is one of the reasons that I started this channel, and so that was really cool to hear this interview with Robert Silverberg. That's actually very recent, talking about Avram and talking about that story specifically. There's actually the full audio for the story in that podcast, as well as a selection of that story read by Leonard Nimoy. So really great. I'm going to link it in the comments, in the description. And definitely, if the story sounds even a little bit interesting to you, please check it out. Check out the podcast. It's one thing that I really want to do here is to bring back visibility to writers who sort of fall through the cracks. Great works and writers that aren't something that you're going to find as easily. I mean, anybody can talk about Stephen King or Dean Koontz, and I'll talk about them too, or about Mary Shelley. Those are kind of easy names to know. Something that always interests me is to deal with lesser known works for these authors, or writers that we just don't hear about anymore. Writers that used to be popular, who have done great things, that have just sort of fallen through the cracks and we've forgotten. So Avram is certainly one of those cases, a really entertaining writer that I think most people will really enjoy. Wrote all kinds of different fiction. So a really great podcast. I really enjoyed listening to that episode. And there's, many episodes. I think that was, I don't know how many episodes specifically, but I think that's like the 10th or 11th episode that I saw on there. So lots of great stuff to do there, to experience and get, and really great preservation for an important writer in the field. That's it for today. Thank you.